inside the Now Morning Show. This morning we're chatting about the Trinidad and Tobago Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. Yes, it's a whole mouthful, so we'll just call it TTEITI, right? We have the Secretariat Head, Sherwin Long, in studio with us this morning. Good morning to you, Sherwin.
Good morning. Good morning to your viewers as well.
How are you doing this morning?
Good.
Tell me, what is the TTEITI?
All right, so the EITI, I'll start with the EITI first. The EITI, as the name states, it's a transparency initiative.
Right.
It's a global standard for countries rich in natural resources, focusing on revenue transparency and accountable management of resources. So globally, you have 56 countries participating. It's almost like an ISO for transparency as it relates to the extractive sector, whether that's oil, gas, mining, even forestry in some cases.
This feels awfully important, Sherwin.
Yeah,
we should be paying attention to this very closely.
It is.
I understand that there were some key findings, but there was a state extractive sector 2024 report. Yeah, and tell me some of the key findings from that report, especially in terms of revenue trends and the performance of the sector overall, because we keep talking about diversification, we keep talking about how much we still depend on this sector. Tell me about the findings from that report.
So what the report does, so I'll start first. Okay, what the report really does is reconciles what companies say they pay to the government versus what the government says it receives.
Okay.
Right? So if, let's say, for instance, company X pays $10 and the government said they receive $9, our independent auditor will highlight the $1 difference and explain the reason for the differences.
Okay.
Right? What we do, it's really a snapshot of what is happening in the sector. So what we do is we look at all of the taxes, we reconcile the taxes, and we look, for instance, to see, okay, what are the trends? So for between 2023 and 2024, I'll just give you two of the bigger tax items, right? So royalties declined by 33%, and production share and contract share profit declined by 50%. Now, the reasons, of course, it's a snapshot. So the reasons our product, it's linked to production. It's also linked to international prices as well. So you would have seen in 2022 at the onset of the Ukraine war, prices would have skyrocketed. So even though our production was sort of trending along the same lines, with the increase in prices, you would see, of course, more revenue. So it really annually gives us a snapshot of where we are in terms of the energy sector revenue, which is really the lifeblood of the economy. But it's important because it funds all of the social expenditure. It also will fund our plans for diversification as well away from the energy sector.
In terms of that 33% decline, what do you think caused that decline to happen, and what does it mean for the sector?
Yeah, it's a function of price, right? So international prices have declined. Of course, the country, we are a price taker. Our production has plateaued at a certain level in terms of gas and oil. So it's really a function of the price that we get for our resources.
Okay, so it's based literally on what the world says the price of oil is, would determine whether we make more or less money.
Yeah, you have benchmark prices. You have prices, for example, linked to the UK and Europe market. You have prices linked to the Asian market and Henry Hub for the US. So depending on where, let's say for gas, depending on where your LNG cargo goes, what price it receives, again, it's a function of the market demand and supply.
What determines where the energy and gas goes? Is that the government or the different in?
Well, it depends as well. Sometimes for example, the government will have the NGC. Right. They would also manage certain LNG cargoes. They determine where it lands. In other instances, what happens is that the shareholders of Atlantic LNG, based on contractual terms and so on, they will determine where the final landing, where the gas lands finally.
Now, I know recently the conversation has been ongoing about climate change, about the impact on the environment and that sort of thing. Does this report provide any insight into that?
Yeah, actually, what we also do is the reporting companies, your major companies, BP, Shell, Woodside, Trinity, etc. They this year for the last 2 to 3 years, we've looked at an environmental pilot. So what we capture is greenhouse gas emissions what these companies emit in terms of CO2, but also give them the opportunity to highlight their plans for mitigating, whether it's looking at energy efficiency, how they reduce their carbon footprint, what plans and policies they have internally. This year, actually, at first we started with NGC and Touchstone came on board. This year we actually have 10 companies disclosing this information. It's important information because it shows that companies are already capturing this data.
Right.
It's not mandated by law for companies to disclose greenhouse gas emissions in Trinidad and Tobago as yet. I was at a conference a few weeks ago and they said that that is currently before cabinet. So
Parliament has been dissolved.
So it shows that companies, in advance of any legal changes that mandates them to disclose this information is already disclosed. It's in the public domain. We also share it with the EMA's air pollution unit, and it goes on the EMA's national transparency system as well.
So now that they've been disclosing voluntarily, what are the insights from that? What are the takeaways that we get from what they've disclosed so far?
Well, what we've seen, again, we cover the upstream link of the value chain. That's basically the people that explore and produce, right? We're not talking about downstream and so on in terms of petrochemicals or even midstream in terms of LNG, right? What we have seen is that when you look on, when you compare their emissions to power generation and the downstream sector, they account for roughly 4% of the emissions in the country, right? The bulk of our emissions come from the power generation and downstream sector. What is important as well, we see is that a lot of companies are taking action in terms of reducing their methane. A lot of companies are taking action in terms of reforestation programs, how to stop venting and flaring of gas as well to reduce that. So you're actually seeing not only the link to the whole pie, but you're also seeing individual actions by companies to reduce their carbon footprint, which is good information to have, to know that things are being done.
Is there another entity, or do you know if there's another entity or another report that deals with the other aspects of things, like the downstream markets and the midstream markets?
Well, we capture information on the midstream and downstream. It's just that we don't reconcile the payments that those different links of the value chain make.
Where do we rank in terms of the EITI aspect of things?
All right, so the EITI, it's a standard. So you have things that you must do.
Right.
So it's a big standard. What they assess how well the civic space in your country. They assess how well you disclose whether it's the ownership of the people that the government partners with to develop the resources. So it's basically they're grading you, right? Trinidad and Tobago, we rank #1 in Latin America and the Caribbean. Of course, in Latin America and the Caribbean, you have countries like Argentina, Colombia, Peru, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Guyana, Suriname as well. Then you have Central American countries like Honduras as well. And fourth globally in the initiative. Yeah.
What does that mean for us?
Well, it's good. I always say that in looking at the EITI standard, it's more than a checklist, right? But we do well in the initiative in terms of disclosing the technical requirements. But we do well in terms of how we communicate the initiative and to different stakeholders, whether that's we've done work with secondary school students, we've went to universities and even business chambers and other civil society groups as well.
I want you to do me a favor and just explain the importance of the work that you're doing in terms of relating it to the average citizen. Why should the average citizen care about this work that you're doing?
Right. So what we do is we independently verify what the country earns from the oil and gas sector.
So we don't have to just take the politician's word for it.
Right.
We have data now.
You have an independent audit firm that does the reconciliation. As I said before, we highlight data on who the government partners with to develop the resources. So that's along the lines of beneficial ownership, disclosure. But importantly as well, I think that our steering committee is it's a big tent, and it shows that industry, it's governed by industry, civil society, and government.
Right.
So you, for example, you have the Ministry of Energy, you will have NGC, Heritage, but you would also have BP, Shell, then you would have Fishermen and Friends of the Sea, you will have the OWTU as well sitting around the table. All our decisions are made by consensus. So I always say that, you know, it's one initiative in the country that shows that even with competing interests, there can be consensus building as well.
Is it consensus building, or is it just a data gathering and
No,
analysis?
actually, anything that you do must be approved by this. It's an 18-member board with our chairman,
Right.
Gregory Maguire. So for the report to be even reached to the public, there must be sign-off by all parties.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's definitely good information to have. One of the things I'm seeing here that came out of the report was the amount of oil spills that we have. I saw that in 2024 alone, there were 250 oil spills.
Right.
Is that locally?
Yeah, it's to place it into context. You have to the sector is oil, especially, is over 100 years of production, right? So you have aging infrastructure. You have areas, let's say, for instance, in heritages or I was going to say petroleum, but heritages, forest reserve area.
Right.
You have a lot of old acreage there that wasn't capped off, but there's still production around it.
Okay.
One of the reasons, when we ask, well, what is the reason for the increase in spills? Or the Ministry of Energy said, well, listen, aging infrastructure is one issue. Of course, ramping up of production after COVID as well, and better monitoring.
So we have a better idea as to where the spills are.
Better monitoring systems so that you quantify more spills.
Yeah. All right. Well, Sherwin, thank you so much for joining us this morning. If people want to get access to this report, is it available for the public?
Yeah, it's available online, www.tteiti.com. We want your feedback. We want you to share the report with your family. It's important in the context of the money that we reconcile. The verification that we do, that money goes towards social expenditure, whether it's pension for your grandmother, whether it's CDAP drugs for your grandmother, whether it's gate for your nephew going to college as well. It funds the social expenditure, so it's important to you.
Definitely important to us. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Sherwin. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
No problem at all. Ladies and gentlemen, Sherwin Long, the Secretariat Head of the TTEITI, which is the Trinidad Tobago Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative.